Today, let's talk about a very taboo subject. We are going to talk about understanding mental health medication. So, if you don't know me, I'm Ophelia, and I do love to discuss a thing quite freely and quite openly. So I have been on mental health medications. To be precise, I used the help of SSRIs from May 2021 to March 2022 last year. And I've decided, as is Mental Health Awareness Month, to talking about them because I think it's about time we carry on dispelling that stigma. It is a kind of interesting to know that everyone has a very different experience. Again, I am not a doctor, so this is not really any advice. This is just sharing my experience and sharing as well what are my opinion on the subject from my own experience and from what also we can hear and read elsewhere. So obviously we are still very much looking at dispelling the misunderstanding of mental illness. We often still struggle to understand that mental illness is remaining on the same spectrum as physical illness. So not only they can be debilitating, but also they can also give you actual physical symptoms. So again, if you don't know me, I'm someone who has CPTSD, so complex post-traumatic syndrome, trauma disorder, and I've also got anxiety, and I do tend to have extreme panic attacks. So some panic attacks can last for a long time. And over the pandemic, I really had an issue with having consistent panic attacks almost on a daily basis, and triggers would come very easily. Triggers such as caffeine, spicy food, anything would easily trigger me. Even just sitting on that desk that I'm sitting at right now could potentially trigger a panic attack. Obviously, a lot of my healthy coping mechanisms and outlets weren't there at the time. So I decided that I was a little bit fed up with it. I had enough, and I contacted my GP, and luckily I came across a GP that was quite understanding, because I had a few GP that were not really going down that route and never got offered the meds, and this one did. So they have like an entire mental health section, which was very helpful and very supportive. And for the first time, I got offered the med. So I went on escitalopram. So not the citalopram, the escitalopram, ESC, which is a sort of like a bit of a milder SSRI than sertraline, but a little bit stronger than the actual citalopram. And I used them for 9 months. So the reason being that what was difficult for me is it was dealing with the symptoms on a daily basis, dealing with a small thing that were, a normal daily life, like drinking my favorite cup of coffee, and still not being able to live my daily life normally. It was actually really debilitating and just too much. So I wanted, people to understand that I think, and when we talk about misunderstanding the mental illness, a lot of people do not understand. They have certain beliefs about the treatment, thinking that the treatment are not really treating real illnesses, and that also like people with mental health issues do not necessarily need medical treatment and medication. So for me, I understood that for the first time in my life, it was something that I, needed to consider, at least until we came out of this like challenging time. And again, I'm really glad I made that decision. I have no regrets. Just dispelling another stigma, another myth, for example, is using the medication as a crutch. So we have a misconception that medication for mental health issues can mean that someone is kind of weak, and it always kind of makes you feel like you are very vulnerable, and that there has been obviously a marketing ploy through pharmaceutical to sell SSRIs and antidepressant for a while. I was saying we have a chemical imbalance to fix. And it's not necessarily the chemical imbalance that we have to fix, but it's an actual support that we get. So it works synergistically with other therapeutic approaches, with other coping mechanisms that help improve your life. It's not just using the medication as one single crutch and option, but it's more finding the right combination of treatment that can allow people to live healthier and a bit of a more balanced life. So for me, as a person who went through the medication, I used them for 9 months. I knew that I personally wanted to use them in a temporary aspect. I wanted to just have them as support by the time we came out of the pandemic. But I also didn't judge myself if, for example, I found out that it was something that was very life-changing positively for me. And it was very positive for the time being. It was so helpful, and I'm so grateful that I've actually used them. I knew it, but I've always kind of known it was going to be a temporary thing. But I also am so happy to know that it is also an option that I can consider in the future if I want to go back to them. It's not an issue. I found for me that the medication really helped me with my compulsions and my workaholism. I found that it was a very positive experience from that end. It completely stopped my panic attacks. And I had a very much more chill personality while I was on the medication, much more chill than I have. Like, I was less of an over and high achieving kind of personality. And I remember one of my friend who told me it's a very good way to reassess for you how much of it comes from, your mental health condition, and how much of it can actually how much of your, sense of purpose comes from, unhealthy and toxic sort of patterns, and how much of it is like part of you and your life and your drive. And though I'm not on medication anymore, I'm still, recovering a workaholic, or a recovering overachiever, and a recovering people pleaser. So, but I'm trying really hard to not let that stop me, because I'm not on medication anymore, obviously. But I really felt the difference back then, and I find that I was really helpful for that. The next myth that we hear a lot is people getting concerned about becoming dependent to the medications. So those medications do not create addiction. They can be misused, that's for sure. But when you are using them correctly through, a healthcare provider, you shouldn't be concerned about addiction or dependency. Also, I know, many of us, they are a lifeline, and they are just like so vital for everyone's daily life. So it's not dependency. What I think for me it was not a worry. I think the dependency that people perceive as is when we realize the positive impact that the medication has on us, we don't really want to get out of it. And why should we? And that's not, it's not necessarily a bad thing to want to remain on them. Again, people shouldn't be judged for having the need to take the medication like until, for the rest of their life. And I wish like people understood that, of course, there are potential risks for, there's like heart health risk related and all that to people being on SSRIs for like their entire lives. That doesn't mean you can't live a healthy lifestyle. And also, let's be honest, it's probably best that you stay on the medication for the rest of your life if, you come off them and it will threaten your life in other ways. So I think for me, I could really feel the difference when I'm on the meds and I'm off the meds. So I thought for me was the biggest concern was coming off the meds and weaning myself off, and having again the side effects from coming off, and just like feeling that I've come off too early, feeling that I wasn't ready, or feeling that I'm not managing coming off the meds really well. but everything went really easy for me. I'm very grateful. And even though that was a huge part of my support system for a long time, I just, again, want to say that everyone's needs and experiences differ. For me, that was an easy process. For me, I knew when I was ready to come off. I had the support of my therapist while I was coming off my meds. And, you know, opinions about preferring being on or off, well, it's a different state of mind. It's a different state of living. I do feel sometimes like I miss being on them. Regretting being on them, no. Regretting coming off them, no. But yes, when I'm under pressure, when the anxiety kind of like get heightened, like the last month or so, there have been moments where I have asked myself if I made the right decision to come off of them, to be honest with you. I've had several panic attacks the last month. I've had quite high anxiety. But, you know, I've come off them a year ago. And, you know, that doesn't mean that I haven't had panic attacks and I haven't managed them very well. But my life is different when I'm on them and when I'm off them. So it is important to understand. This is why we shouldn't be judging people for the need that they need to be on them. Now, like discussing the side effects and why people fear them. There is a complete valid fear. There are, you know, side effects of like going on them, side effects for coming off them. But again, weighing the pros and the cons, very often there are a lot more pros than cons. For me, my first 10 days were the worst. The first day I took them, so like the doctors will tell you it gets worse before it gets better when you go on meds, right? When I took the meds for the first time, I was working, and I was working in a co-working space in like a members club in central London, and I ended up taking it, drinking coffee, and be like, well, you know, devil may care, we'll see what happens, see you on the other side. And next thing I know is that my whole mind went on an entire journey hearing these voices. It gets worse, but we're getting better. So my paranoia started setting in, and I was just sat there waiting for it to happen. And then all of a sudden, I just felt like I was the same sensations as coming up on ecstasy. It was very weird, but without the actual effects of high. So like more when if you've ever taken ecstasy in your life, and you have anxiety naturally, sometimes you are the uncontrollable feelings gets you really paranoid. And this is what happened when I started taking the meds for like a whole solid week. I felt like that. And the first time, obviously, I was very unsure, and I was very, very worried because I just kept repeating myself what the doctor said. I read the thing about the serotonin syndrome, when it creates too much serotonin in your brain and you can die. And obviously that didn't help. And I ended up having an ambulance having to come on the street in the middle of Mayfair, to monitor me and just, you know, check my vitals for like 45 minutes because I was just so worried. And I'm laughing about it first, but now I'm laughing about it. But back then, I was kind of ashamed and like embarrassed, obviously, getting an ambulance in the middle of like central London and just feeling like I was gonna die. But yeah, that happened. And then the whole week was difficult. The whole week I was studying my classes. I'm just starting, I'm coming on, and this is very difficult. I felt extremely fragile and vulnerable. Like I just felt like I needed to be wrapped in bubble wrap like this entire week. And even if I knew like part of it was like my paranoia, I knew that it was definitely making me feel worse, basically, because I definitely felt the moment when it stabilized. I definitely felt when it's like, oh, that's it, it's working now. This is one day you wake up and you're just like, wow, this is crazy. You feel like you see the world in a completely different lens. Yeah, and that's when you know they start working. Again, I was very lucky. A few people, won't have the same experience. You might have to try different medication. At one point, I was so worried about this medication that I've called the doctor, and the doctor explained to me that escitalopram was a little bit stronger than citalopram, and she decided to put me on the citalopram one. But by the time the prescription arrived, I felt fine. So I just gave up on the idea and just kept going, because I was like, I'm not changing. I'm not feeling like, I'm not going through the whole like starting over again. But I think the side effect that was like the more annoying at first was the weight gain. I put well over 6 kilos, yes. And I was also like back in 2021, we were not quite back at the gym, we're not quite back full on working. And that kind of demoralized me, because having lost all my practice in aerial, having also put on extra kilos, it wasn't like the body weight that was annoying me. It was more the feeling that I was really struggling with my aerial training. I felt really heavy and I felt out of shape, and it was very frustrating. And also talking about that workaholism and that hustle and grind and that overachieving attitude, it was completely gone. But also sometimes that meant that I didn't have the motivation to do anything such as this, like recording podcast and feeling a sense of purpose and wanting to do any more than just I had to be, which means going to work, earning the money that I could pay my bills with, and going to school. Obviously, I was doing a full-time degree as well back then, so which I just finished. So I didn't feel like doing more than that. And I was frustrated a little bit with this. It was an important part of the process for me to understand, again, what we were talking about, doing less and what is actually part of my disorder and so on. But those are the side effects that I found a little bit harder to handle. And those were the side effects that I was very happy to not have anymore when I came off the meds, yes. But again, as we discussed and as I said previously, I knew what my life was on them, and I know what my life is of them, and there are definitely a lot of benefits. There were a lot of benefits for me to go on them, and I really, really appreciate having tried and having experienced the medications when I needed them. So also I wanted to discuss the perception of medication as a last resort, like it's a contingency plan, something to use when everything else has failed. And this is still part of the stigma that we attribute to medication. And I want to say that this is one I related the most to. So for sure, it's not only that doctors never really spoke to me about getting medication, but it's also me having this sort of weird avoidance, because I was well attached to that stigma, thinking that you must try everything and fail. So that means that you've failed at everything, you've tried everything, and I'm like that. I will try everything. I meditate every day, I practice yoga, I eat well, I look after everything I can in my life. And that doesn't mean I don't get panic attacks. I still do get them. I really do. I think mostly I get them now due to burnout and just heightened stress. I think being on the meds as well make me realize how exposed we can get ourselves into the environment. And not only the pandemic got me more sensitive to that, but I think experimenting a deeper sense of calm in my head. Sometimes I just feel more overwhelmed a little bit faster. When you come off the meds, all your emotions starting to resurface become a lot more colorful. It's like you step from 2D back into 3D. So I think since then, you realize how much you expose yourself to extreme stressful environment. And I think that's why my whole body now realizes how much I can push myself through, and that's not worth it. So I think my mind is now using that as a way to tell me to stop and slow down. But I definitely kind of like pushed until the last bit, that's what happened during the pandemic. I was like, I just can't. I'm trying everything, and there's nothing else. I've never judged anyone for considering this as an option whenever they wanted to. I think it was something I had to work on myself. And I think I realized after that it was a pretty empowering decision to make. Again, I felt ashamed of it because being a fitness professional, you do feel a little bit, not shame for it, but you know that fitness professional will always be like, well, we are resilient creatures, and we because we have such a fitness routine, we should not be struggling that much with mental health. That's also another subject I'm going to be speaking about soon, so stay tuned. But I think I for a long time perceived that the moment I would take medication, then it would make me feel a little bit like a failure. So I switched that to seeing this as a way to being empowered and be like, you know what? That's a choice I'm making for myself right now, and so be it. And I feel pretty powerful about it because we have access to that. And again, from experiencing it, I am so glad I did that. And I'm really hoping that if you had hesitancy about this, if you do have this kind of stigma attached to like the crutch and the last resort, let me tell you, you're wasting your time. You're wasting a lot of mental energy trying to fight against that, so I would really recommend that you let go of that shame. And if you were really teetering on like deciding to go for them, then obviously speak to your healthcare provider. But don't be scared. Don't be scared. There is nothing to be scared about. It really is a wonderful part of your support system when you really need it. Another one that I found interesting that people feel concerned about are privacy and confidentiality. Obviously, once you start taking meds, it's in your files. Your employers start, it's part of it. When you apply to a job, you do have to say if you're on medication, if you've ever been on medication. So there is obviously this huge fear of judgment, discrimination, and rightfully so. We shouldn't be discriminated against that just because we use medication. Actually, it's quite the opposite. I think using medication can really help keep someone afloat at work, and in a better and healthier way. So now, for me, being self-employed and being a pretty open and public person, I for sure felt quite vulnerable saying it to people. Not everyone was always approving of my decision. Again, being a fitness professional, a lot of people are not really approving of that because it's medication. It's big pharma. It affects your metabolism and it makes you put on weight and it kills your libido and blah, blah, blah. I mean, for me, didn't do that. It's another thing, a little bit more personal. But yes, a lot of people will start telling you, it does that. For sure, you do get a lot of opinions. You will come across a lot of people with opinions, and that is inevitable. Because again, this is what we're doing this for. We're trying to break that stigma, but it's still there. So you do have to face that. But when I started opening up and saying to everyone, the outpour of people sharing their own experience is incredible. You feel much more connected because people feel like they can speak to you. They're there to help you. I've had this very good support system on Facebook where we have a private group. We talk to each other, how to navigate the first few days. And everybody, people I never knew, I never imagined actually on medications just started telling me that they are on medication, and it just really makes you feel safe, supported, less alone. And there's definitely a lot more people that are on them that you can imagine. So I think from a community perspective, I felt a lot more connected to the mental health community, that really outweighs all the opinions that other people would say. I can guarantee you that. But just really find your people. It's very important. And finally, let's discuss the cultural and societal belief. So obviously in certain cultures and society, we still hold quite a lot of stigma around medication. We sometimes view it as unnatural, harmful, and sometimes it just makes you want less to ask for help, right? I think from, obviously, like I say, in the fitness industry, some of my colleagues, some of my friends, peers, acquaintances, everybody had opinion. But even in my family, and some of my family people have been on antidepressant and all that, but everybody was just, French people were just a bit like, oh, but antidepressants, they're a bit shit, right? They're not very good for you. And then there is still a bit of stigma. Let it be known that apparently, like, French people love antidepressant, but they don't want to say it, which is quite weird because when you've read about it, we do take a lot of antidepressant. But I did hear my close family be like, oh, it was weird because it just felt like, not that we're judging, but because I live in London and they live there, there is a distance. Obviously, there is a bit of a disconnect into understanding where I come from, like how I feel, and obviously I don't really disclose a lot of like my mental health state. And I think it was surprising to them to realize that I went down that route, because again, we go back to that last resort, that sort of like other stigma attached to it, right? The stigma of, oh my God, this is like, she was down in the pit. Oh, and we never saw that. And that wasn't the case. Again, I just always feel like when people talk about the mental health, it's a thing that we're struggling so much. I just want to talk about my mental health. Like we're able to talk about the weather, the weather's shit. And I want to be cranky about it. Right? If you see that there has been no sun in the UK, right? Can we moan about that? So, if I come and like moan about my mental health, or just like, at the moment I'm not feeling that great, I just want to have an ear. I don't want to be like, oh, this is so bad. Like, like, I'm not fragile. I'll get through this. I just telling you because, let's just keep in touch and let's just like keep checking in on each other. But I just feel like sometimes when you say, oh man, I'm taking meds now, or when someone tells me that they've gone on meds now, they've decided to go on meds or go off meds, I celebrate it. It's a celebration because, again, I found that it was pretty empowering to make this decision. When people make decisions for themselves, when they chose this autonomy to take charge, I think it's super empowering. It comes from a vulnerable place, but a really strong place as well. And I really wish we stop just assigning mental health issue as like this really fragile thing. And, either people don't know how to really approach it. When it's just like, I just want to talk about this. It's not the end of the world. And, and I think the best is actually talking about it like this before it gets too far. Because this is the issue, then people don't want to talk about it like it's a regular day at work, like we're talking about the weather, and then it just goes down too far to the point that people don't even want to talk about it anymore. When you enter this kind of weird mental health state, it's lonely enough because you feel quite lonely, even though it's not the case, right? But if you're not able to discuss this sort of weird fluctuation, this emotional states, then when you are really down, no one's going to be there, in the sense that you're not going to feel like you can talk about it without feeling like bad as well. Like I have this, for me, I really have this dislike of people around me making me feel like it's a fragile thing. You are like, this is so bad. And my mum worries about it. And it annoys me. I just wish that we could just freely speak about it. So we would be able to just say, you know what, right now I'm really not okay. I think it's just a thing that our society hasn't come to terms with. Just feeling okay, discussing feelings, emotions, without making such a big deal out of it before it gets too late, before you want to go into the end, like panic attacks are not great. When I talk about my panic attacks, I never see them as like, they're not pleasant, but you know, they're just part of my life, and I don't want it to be like a thing that people see as like, oh my god, is she okay, and la la la, and you know, like people going through mental health issues are quite strong people, especially when they don't talk about it. It's like being strong and resilient sometimes is not necessarily the best of a thing, because yes, we can cope with so much, but I just wish we had a bit more emotional intelligence to not feel, oh my god, like talking about emotions, feelings, and mental health states, like, it's such a big deal. It should be a big deal when someone is like really struggling, right? We shouldn't ignore when someone is going way too far. But things like when someone tells you they decided to go on medication, or they decided to start therapy, which I think for me is a very important part of self-growth. It's a huge tool for your own self-growth, and everybody should try it at least once in their life, because we all have stuff to untangle, we all have stuff to study. It's important to make your relationships better. And if you say every time you go to therapy and all that, oh my god, she's like so unwell, it's not. It's part of life, and I think people should really get a bit more comfortable with that each of us have shit that they need to deal with, trauma that they need to uncover, toxic patterns they need to get rid of. And if we were talking about it a lot more casually, we wouldn't end up into places that where we've seen some of our loved ones go to. So I think, like, in conclusion, going back to the meds, let's remember that it's an extremely important lifeline to a lot of people. I am very, very grateful that they've been there, available for me. And I'm really hoping that this episode has helped you see a bit more clearly what myth can still linger within our own preconceptions, mine included, and how we can really break free from that. And I'm really hoping that you'll be a bit more open into talking about this kind of subjects with your friends and with your peers and your family, and that you'll be more comfortable making a decision for yourself should the time come you decide to go for them. I will leave you here. I wanted to say thank you so much for joining today, and I will speak to you in my next episode, where I talk again about the toxic traits that we have in the fitness industry when it comes to mental health. But I wanted to say thank you so much. Bye.